Building wealth takes years of hard work, smart decisions, and careful planning. Most people who become wealthy do so through dedication, sacrifice, and intelligent choices over decades. But losing everything can happen in a single moment through one catastrophically stupid decision that destroys decades of success instantly. 1. A lottery winner spent his entire $50 million fortune on a failed theme park based exclusively on his own life story that absolutely nobody wanted to visit. The vanity project consumed every dollar of his lottery winnings, building attractions celebrating himself. The park featured rides named after his family members, exhibits showcasing his lottery ticket, a museum dedicated to his childhood, and attractions commemorating his life milestones that visitors found bizarre and narcissistic. Construction costs spiraled out of control as he demanded increasingly elaborate tributes to his own existence, including a 50-foot golden statue of himself at the entrance. Marketing campaigns failed catastrophically because nobody wanted to spend money visiting a park dedicated to celebrating some random lottery winner's mundane life. The park opened to nearly empty crowds with only curious locals attending opening day, before word spread about how terrible it was. The park closed within 6 months, but every single dollar of his lottery fortune had been spent on construction, with nothing recoverable from the failed attraction. The stupidity of thinking millions of people would pay admission to celebrate a complete stranger's unremarkable life destroyed his entire windfall before he realized nobody cared about his story. 2. A tech executive lost $800 million by keeping his entire fortune concentrated in company stock that crashed to zero overnight during a massive accounting scandal. The executive had refused to diversify, despite financial advisors begging him for years to sell portions and spread his risk across different investments. He genuinely believed his company was invincible and immune to market forces, keeping 100% of his accumulated wealth in his employer's stock. When the accounting fraud was discovered by federal investigators, the stock price collapsed from $150 per share to literally $0 within a single trading day. The decades of accumulated stock options, employee holdings, and personal purchases evaporated completely before he could execute a single sale. The lack of basic diversification turned him from a near billionaire to completely broke when the scandal broke on a Tuesday morning. Financial advisors who had warned him for years about concentration risk could only watch in horror. The stupidity of ignoring the most fundamental investment principle of portfolio diversification destroyed generational wealth that could have been preserved with even minimal risk management. 3. A real estate mogul signed a personal guarantee on $300 million worth of property loans just weeks before the 2008 financial crash demolished real estate values. The personal guarantee meant he was individually and completely liable when the commercial properties crashed 70% in value almost overnight. The collapsing real estate market left him personally owing hundreds of millions of dollars that the properties could no longer cover. His personal assets, including homes, cars, boats, and investment accounts, were immediately seized by lenders to cover the corporate loans he'd personally guaranteed. The decision to personally back business debt destroyed his personal fortune that should have been protected through proper corporate structure. The timing couldn't have been more catastrophically wrong, signing massive personal guarantees at the absolute peak of the real estate bubble. His luxury waterfront homes, exotic car collection, and personal investment accounts were liquidated by creditors to cover business losses that proper legal structure would have isolated. The stupidity of personally guaranteeing business debt during an obvious real estate bubble destroyed his entire net worth and left him owing millions more. 4. An investor lost $200 million in a Ponzi scheme run by his supposed best friend, who he never bothered to verify, investigate, or question over 15 years. The personal friendship created blind trust that completely eliminated any due diligence or basic verification. The returns seemed obviously too good to be true, consistently showing 15 to 20% annual gains regardless of market conditions, but he never questioned his trusted friend. He enthusiastically referred dozens of other wealthy friends and family members to the investment scheme, amplifying his eventual losses through legal liability and personal guilt. When the Ponzi finally collapsed after the 2008 market crash eliminated new investor money, his entire fortune was revealed to be nothing but fictitious paper gains that never actually existed. The authorities investigated him for his role in promoting the fraud to other victims who lost money on his recommendation. His reputation in business and social circles was completely destroyed, along with his wealth. The stupidity of trusting a childhood friend with $200 million without performing even basic background checking or verification cost him everything he'd built. The failure to do simple due diligence on returns that were mathematically impossible to sustain destroyed his entire fortune. 5. A celebrity athlete lost $110 million by letting his financial advisor gamble the entire fortune on absurdly risky investments without any oversight or review for 8 years. The athlete never once reviewed account statements or questioned suspicious activity on his accounts. The advisor was systematically placing massive bets on speculative penny stocks, failed startups, and obvious fraudulent schemes while keeping the mounting losses completely hidden. By the time the fraud was finally discovered through an IRS audit, nearly all of the money had vanished into failed investments and advisor fees. The athlete had signed blank authorization documents, giving the advisor unlimited control over every aspect of his finances without understanding what he was signing. The investments included companies that didn't exist, real estate and locations worth nothing, and schemes so obvious that minimal investigation would have revealed the fraud. Legal recovery proved impossible because the advisor had actually spent and lost the money rather than hiding it somewhere recoverable. The stupidity of giving complete financial control to someone without performing any verification or oversight destroyed his entire career earnings. The total abdication of financial responsibility cost him everything he'd earned over a 15-year professional sports career. 6. A businessman lost his $400 million fortune in a single-day trading options contracts without understanding how derivatives or leverage actually worked. The options positions were massively leveraged bets on market direction that went catastrophically wrong within hours of opening. He genuinely thought he understood how derivatives worked, but was actually trading with 50x leverage using borrowed money he couldn't possibly cover if positions moved against him. A 3% market movement in the wrong direction completely wiped out his positions and triggered margin calls that exceeded his entire net worth. The brokerage firm immediately seized all his personal assets to cover the trading losses, but the amounts weren't nearly sufficient. He went from being worth $400 million in the morning to owing the brokerage firm an additional $150 million by market close. The mathematical complexity of options and derivatives had amplified a small market movement into total financial destruction. The stupidity of trading highly complex leveraged instruments he fundamentally didn't understand destroyed everything he owned in less than one trading day. The leverage magnified what would have been a manageable loss into complete annihilation of generational wealth. 7. A startup founder lost $600 million by arrogantly refusing to sell his company at peak valuation, stubbornly waiting for a higher acquisition offer that never materialized. Multiple serious acquisition offers at $600 million were rejected as personally insulting and insufficient for his revolutionary company. He genuinely believed the company was worth over $1 billion and held out for terms that matched his inflated self-assessment. The market shifted dramatically, and competitors emerged with better products while he waited for validation of his worth. Within just 18 months, the company was completely worthless and forced to shut down operations. His equity stake went from $600 million in real offers on the table to literally $0 when the company dissolved. The greed and ego of demanding more destroyed the actual fortune he could have taken. Board members and investors who begged him to accept the offers watched in horror as the opportunity evaporated. The stupidity of refusing genuinely life-changing money while chasing hypothetical bigger money cost him everything. The inability to recognize that a bird in the hand is worth infinitely more than fantasies in the bush destroyed his one chance at generational wealth. 8. A divorcing billionaire lost $2.5 billion by attempting to hide assets in an amateurish, poorly executed scheme that was easily discovered and resulted in massive punitive damages. The attempt to conceal wealth during divorce proceedings was so obvious and incompetent that forensic accountants found everything within weeks. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and asset transfers to relatives were documented with paper trails that a high school student could have followed. The judge imposed enormous punitive damages on top of the normal settlement, specifically to punish the fraud and deception. The penalty for attempting to hide assets exceeded what completely honest disclosure would have cost by over $1 billion. Legal fees for defending the asset concealment consumed an additional tens of millions in pointless litigation. The criminal charges for fraud resulted in jail time, asset seizure, and complete destruction of his business reputation. Other business partners discovered the fraud during the proceedings and terminated all professional relationships. The stupidity of executing a poorly planned asset concealment scheme made the divorce infinitely more expensive than honest disclosure would have been, destroying far more wealth through penalties and fees than the original settlement would have required. 9. An heir lost a $300 million inheritance by contesting a legally valid will based on nothing but wounded pride, then losing catastrophically after years of expensive litigation. The will clearly and unambiguously left the entire fortune to established charities, but the heir sued claiming mental incompetence without any supporting evidence. Years of litigation consumed tens of millions in legal fees for arguments that every attorney said were obviously without merit. The case was doomed from the beginning, but personal ego and pride prevented accepting reality or settling. The final judgment awarded nothing to the heir and included massive legal fees for the opposing side that he was ordered to pay. The inheritance that could have been his through normal channels was completely gone, and he owed millions more in legal judgments. The estate lawyers who strongly warned against contesting were ignored because he couldn't accept being disinherited. The stupidity of fighting an obviously unwinnable legal case destroyed the fortune and created substantial additional debt through legal fees and penalties for frivolous litigation. 10. A pharmaceutical executive lost $500 million when his company's only drug in development spectacularly failed FDA approval, and the stock crashed 95% in one day. The company had poured everything into developing a single product, with the entire business model dependent on regulatory approval. He had kept all his personal wealth concentrated in company stock, despite the binary risk being obvious to everyone. When the FDA issued a complete response letter rejecting the drug for serious safety concerns, the stock became effectively worthless in the opening trading hours. His net worth evaporated in the first 90 minutes of trading after the announcement. The lack of any approved alternative products or pipeline meant the company was immediately finished as a going concern. Even minimal diversification would have preserved most of his wealth through the failure, but he refused all advice. Financial advisors had begged him to sell at least half his holdings, but he was convinced approval was guaranteed. The stupidity of concentrating absolutely everything in a binary FDA outcome destroyed his entire fortune when the obvious risk materialized exactly as advisors had warned. 11. A gambling addict lost $127 million in a single 3-day weekend at Las Vegas casinos, playing games that are mathematically designed for players to lose. The gambling addiction had convinced him he possessed a special system to beat the house at games with known negative expected values. Every single game he played, blackjack, baccarat, craps, and roulette, had house edges that made long-term winning mathematically impossible. The casinos enthusiastically extended unlimited credit because they understood probability and knew with certainty he would lose everything. 3 days of continuous gambling at maximum table limits destroyed his entire fortune that had taken 30 years to accumulate. The mathematical impossibility of winning long-term at negative expectancy games had been carefully explained by statisticians he hired, then ignored. Friends and family members watched helplessly as he bet away generational wealth on games specifically designed for him to lose. The casino hosts treated him like royalty while systematically extracting every dollar he possessed. The stupidity of believing you can overcome mathematical certainty through intuition or luck cost him absolutely everything. The illusion that gambling systems can beat games with built-in house advantages destroyed wealth that should have lasted generations. 12. A businessman lost $80 million by investing his entire fortune in his brother's startup company that existed only on paper as an elaborate fraud. The brothers' business plan was complete fiction, with no viable product, no real technology, and no actual market. No due diligence whatsoever was performed because family relationships completely substituted for business sense and verification. The investment was made in multiple tranches, with each revealed loss leading to throwing more money after bad. The brother was systematically spending lavishly on personal expenses, cars, homes, vacations, disguised as business development costs. By the time the complete fraud became undeniable even to him, all the money was irretrievably gone and spent. Legal action against his own brother for fraud was emotionally complicated and ultimately recovered nothing of value. The brother declared personal bankruptcy, leaving no assets to pursue. The stupidity of completely confusing family loyalty with qualified investment decision-making destroyed the fortune. The failure to treat a family member's business proposition with the same skepticism applied to strangers cost him everything. 13. A cryptocurrency enthusiast lost $250 million by keeping his entire Bitcoin fortune on a single exchange that collapsed and systematically stole all customer funds. The exchange bankruptcy revealed that customer deposits had been secretly stolen by executives and used for personal investments and expenses. The cryptocurrency was completely uninsured and unrecoverable, unlike traditional bank deposits protected by FDIC insurance. He had deliberately ignored repeated advice to use cold storage wallets or distribute holdings across multiple platforms. The convenience of keeping everything accessible in one place enabled the total loss when that platform proved fraudulent. Warning signs about the exchange's financial problems were dismissed because his withdrawals had always processed successfully in the past. Legal recovery in cryptocurrency fraud cases proved nearly impossible due to offshore registration and disappeared executives. The stupidity of trusting a single unregulated offshore platform with his entire fortune destroyed everything when the inevitable fraud was revealed. 14. An executive lost $400 million in a single fraudulent wire transfer to sophisticated scammers who impersonated his company's CFO via email. The email address appeared completely legitimate, with only microscopic differences in spelling that went completely unnoticed. The wire transfer authorization was provided based on urgent instructions, without any verbal confirmation of the unusual request. By the time the fraud was discovered hours later, the money had disappeared through dozens of accounts across multiple countries. The bank's policies and liability limitations prevented any recovery once the properly authorized transfer was completed. The company's insurance policy denied the massive claim, citing gross negligence and not following basic verification procedures. The executive's personal guarantee of company funds made him individually liable for the entire loss. The stupidity of not making a simple phone call to verify a $400 million wire transfer cost him his entire personal fortune. 15. An art collector lost $150 million when his entire prestigious collection was revealed to be elaborate forgeries purchased without proper authentication. The paintings by supposed masters were purchased from a dealer who seemed superficially reputable without any independent expert verification. Expert authentication was deliberately skipped to save the few $1,000s it would have cost, and to speed up the acquisition process. The master forger had created completely convincing provenance documents and exhibition histories for each piece. When the sophisticated fraud was finally exposed, the entire collection became instantly and completely worthless. The dealer had long since disappeared with all the money to a country without extradition treaties. Insurance claims were denied because proper authentication protocols weren't followed before the purchases. The stupidity of buying 9-figure art collections without spending a few thousand on independent expert verification destroyed the entire collection value overnight. 16. A rogue trader lost $6 billion in unauthorized trading positions at a major bank that destroyed his personal wealth and freedom. The trading started with small losses that were hidden through increasingly elaborate accounting tricks and false entries. Desperate doubling down on losing positions turned initial millions into billions in accumulated losses. The bank discovered the massive fraud and immediately seized all his personal assets and terminated his employment. Criminal charges resulted in prison time, lifetime bans from the financial industry, and complete personal bankruptcy. Personal guarantees and bonus clawbacks left him owing millions even after all assets were seized. The trading strategy was obviously and fundamentally flawed, but desperation and pride prevented admitting the losses and stopping. The stupidity of hiding catastrophic losses and making exponentially larger bets to try to recover destroyed everything and resulted in years of imprisonment. 17. A venture capitalist lost $300 million investing in a company whose core technology was literally physically impossible, according to established laws of physics. The startup claimed revolutionary energy generation technology that blatantly violated the laws of thermodynamics and conservation of energy. Multiple credentialed scientists and engineers carefully explained exactly why the technology couldn't possibly work, but were dismissed as jealous and closed-minded. The charismatic founder convinced the investor through personal charm and elaborate technical presentations that appeared sophisticated to non-experts. Even minimal due diligence would have immediately revealed the fundamental impossibility of the proposed technology. Investment tranches continued for 3 years, despite zero working prototypes or believable evidence of progress. When the fraud was finally exposed by investigative journalists, all the invested money had been spent. The stupidity of ignoring basic physics that high school students understand for investment decisions destroyed the entire fortune. The failure to consult actual experts before investing in impossible technology cost him everything. 18. A real estate developer lost $200 million building luxury condominiums in a location with absolutely no market demand or buyer interest. Comprehensive market research clearly showed zero demand for luxury units in the economically depressed location he chose. The developer's massive ego convinced him he could single-handedly create market demand where absolutely none existed. Construction costs drastically exceeded initial budgets, while exactly 0 units pre-sold to buyers. The completed 40-story building sat completely empty with massive carrying costs, insurance, and maintenance expenses. Bankruptcy proceedings eventually sold the building at a catastrophic 85% loss. Lenders seized his personal assets that had been pledged as additional collateral on the construction loans. The stupidity of completely ignoring professional market research and building for non-existent buyers destroyed everything he owned. 19. An entrepreneur lost $450 million by taking a consistently profitable company public at the worst possible timing, right before the 1987 market crash. Multiple advisors strongly recommended waiting 6 months, but he absolutely insisted on immediate IPO execution. The initial public offering launched 3 days before Black Monday's historic market crash. The stock price collapsed along with the entire market before his lockup period allowed selling any shares. Legal lockup periods prevented any selling whatsoever during and immediately after the crash. By the time he was legally permitted to sell shares, the stock was trading at pennies on the dollar. The company went bankrupt during the recession that followed, making the shares completely worthless. The stupidity of forcing catastrophically bad timing instead of waiting a few months destroyed the fortune that patient timing would have preserved. 20. A music producer lost $90 million through a terrible record label contract where he signed away all rights without reading the agreement or consulting an attorney. The contract gave the record label perpetual ownership of all music rights and future earnings in perpetuity. Multiple entertainment lawyers strongly advised against signing and offered to negotiate better terms, but he impatiently trusted the label executives. The deliberately complex deal structure meant he earned absolutely nothing from massive hits that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. Legal challenges to the contract failed because it was legally valid despite being financially devastating. Decades of catalog earnings went entirely to the label while he received zero royalties. Career earnings were completely destroyed by one impatient signature he could never undo. The stupidity of signing away your life's work without reading the contract cost him his entire musical fortune and legacy. 21. A commodities trader lost $1.6 billion betting against oil prices that moved dramatically in the opposite direction. The massive short position assumed oil prices would collapse, but they surged 40% instead. Margin calls forced catastrophic liquidation at the worst possible prices. Personal guarantees made him individually liable for losses, far exceeding his initial capital investment. The extreme leverage amplified losses to multiples of the capital originally at risk. Bankruptcy protection proved insufficient to cover the enormous trading debts. Creditors pursued his personal assets for decades after the bankruptcy. The stupidity of taking massively leveraged commodity bets without stop losses destroyed his wealth and created permanent, inescapable debt. 22. An inventor lost $180 million manufacturing hundreds of thousands of units of a product that absolutely nobody wanted before testing market demand. Millions were spent on factory equipment, tooling, and inventory without a single confirmed customer order. Even basic market testing would have revealed zero consumer demand before beginning expensive manufacturing. The warehouse full of completely unsellable products represented total unrecoverable loss. Desperate attempts to discount and liquidate failed because the product was genuinely useless. Creditors seized and auctioned the factory equipment for pennies on the dollar. The massive inventory was literally thrown into landfills because it had no value whatsoever. The stupidity of building before selling and validating market demand destroyed the entire fortune. 23. A hedge fund manager lost $800 million in the Swiss franc shock when Switzerland unexpectedly abandoned its currency peg. The entire trading strategy assumed the Swiss National Bank's currency peg was permanent and essentially guaranteed. Massive leverage positions bet everything on the peg continuing indefinitely. When Switzerland suddenly and without warning abandoned the peg, the currency moved violently and unpredictably. The losses exceeded the fund's entire capital within minutes of the announcement. Personal wealth was completely consumed covering fund losses and investor redemptions. Investors sued over the fundamentally flawed strategy despite the risks being theoretically disclosed. The stupidity of betting absolutely everything on a government promise that could be reversed at any moment destroyed the fortune. 24. A restaurant chain owner lost $250 million through recklessly rapid expansion without systems to maintain consistency or quality. Hundreds of locations opened simultaneously without adequate training, management structure, or quality control systems. Food quality collapsed dramatically, leading to waves of mass customer complaints and social media disasters. The brand reputation was irreparably destroyed before problems could possibly be identified and fixed. Massive losses from operating unprofitable locations consumed all available capital. Franchise lawsuits from angry franchisees added additional millions to the financial catastrophe. Bankruptcy closed 90% of locations with enormous losses to all stakeholders. The stupidity of prioritizing growth without infrastructure destroyed the successful original concept and entire fortune. 25. A technology investor lost $500 million in the dot-com crash by stubbornly refusing to sell obviously overvalued bubble stocks. The absurd valuations were clearly and obviously unsustainable, but greed prevented taking any profits. Every single financial advisor recommended selling at least half the holdings at peak valuations, but he believed technology stocks would keep rising forever. The crash destroyed 99% of the portfolio's value within 18 months. Stocks worth $500 million became worth a few million. Tax implications and obligations from previous profitable years created additional debts he couldn't pay. The paper fortune that appeared and grew in the bubble disappeared faster than it had materialized. The stupidity of believing financial bubbles last forever destroyed gains that should have been life-changing. 26. A mining executive lost $350 million when his company's primary mine catastrophically flooded and all equipment was destroyed. Insurance coverage had been allowed to lapse to save money during temporary cash flow problems. The completely uninsured loss bankrupted the company instantly. Personal guarantees on company debt made him individually liable for obligations the company couldn't pay. The flooded mine was completely unrecoverable and had to be permanently abandoned. Assets were seized but proved completely insufficient to cover the massive liabilities. The decision to let insurance lapse to save a few $100,000 cost everything. The stupidity of canceling coverage to save insignificant amounts cost him hundreds of millions. 27. A professional poker player lost $40 million in a single game against opponents who were systematically cheating through marked cards and collusion. The underground game involved sophisticated marked cards and coordinated collusion between multiple other players. His genuine skill and years of experience were completely irrelevant against organized cheating. The losses were gambling debts that carried serious consequences and had to be paid immediately. Criminal investigation was insufficient to recover any of the money. The cheaters had disappeared before authorities could act. The stupidity of playing in an obviously rigged game without recognizing the coordinated cheating destroyed his entire tournament career winnings. 28. An oil tycoon lost $700 million by drilling in locations where no oil existed based on completely fraudulent geological surveys. The geological surveys were entirely fabricated by corrupt consultants who were taking bribes from equipment suppliers. Every single well drilled came up completely dry, but he kept trying new locations based on the same fraudulent surveys. The fraud was eventually exposed, but all the money had been irretrievably spent on drilling and equipment. The consultants had disappeared with their enormous fees. The oil reserves that justified the massive investment never existed anywhere. The stupidity of trusting fraudulent data without independent verification destroyed the fortune built over decades in the industry. 29. A pharmaceutical investor lost $400 million when a drug he heavily invested in killed multiple people during clinical trials. The early warning signs of serious toxicity were deliberately ignored to maintain trial momentum. When the deaths occurred and were linked to the drug, the company and all investments were instantly finished. Criminal liability from ignoring obvious safety signals created massive additional legal problems. The investment became simultaneously worthless and a source of huge legal liability. Lawsuits from victims' families named all investors as defendants in wrongful death suits. The stupidity of ignoring safety for speed destroyed the investment and created massive legal exposure that exceeded the original investment. 30. A lottery winner lost his entire $315 million jackpot by giving huge amounts to literally every person who asked. Family members, supposed friends, complete strangers, and obvious scammers all received millions without question. No financial planning or trust structure was established to protect the money. The pathological generosity was systematically exploited by everyone who heard about the lottery win. Within just 3 years, the entire massive fortune had been distributed to hundreds of people. Tax bills on the lottery winnings arrived, but all the money was already gone. Bankruptcy followed one of the largest lottery wins in history. The stupidity of saying yes to everyone and never saying no destroyed the windfall faster than seemed possible. 31. A hedge fund founder lost $2 billion shorting Tesla stock, while the company's valuation multiplied 5 times. The short position grew increasingly larger as the stock rose, amplifying losses. Absolute conviction in being right prevented cutting losses when obviously wrong. The short squeeze forced buying shares at higher and higher prices to cover positions. Margin calls consumed all available capital from the fund and personal accounts. Personal assets were seized when fund assets proved completely insufficient. The trade became one of the most catastrophic bets in hedge fund history. The stupidity of fighting the market trend and refusing to admit being wrong destroyed everything. 32. An entrepreneur lost $180 million launching a social network intended to compete directly with Facebook without any unique features or value proposition. The obvious copycat product offered absolutely nothing new to attract users away from the established platform. Marketing spending was enormous, but user acquisition remained at zero. Money was spent building massive infrastructure before proving anyone wanted the product. No users meant no revenue, while costs soared into the millions monthly. Investor money was completely consumed before anyone admitted the obvious failure. The stupidity of copying without innovating or differentiating destroyed the investment. 33. A fashion mogul lost $220 million on a clothing line that spectacularly missed all trends and sold absolutely nothing. Professional market research was completely ignored in favor of personal taste. The designs appealed to nobody and sat unsold in warehouses accumulating dust. Massive production was committed and completed before testing any market reception. Major retailers returned all merchandise for full refunds due to complete lack of sales. The enormous inventory was eventually donated for minimal tax write-offs. The stupidity of assuming personal taste represented broader market demand destroyed the fortune. 34. A diamond dealer lost $150 million when his entire diamond cache was revealed to be synthetic laboratory-created stones. The complete collection purchased over decades of dealing was artificial. The dealer's supposedly expert eye for quality had failed to detect the sophisticated fraud. When finally discovered through testing, the collection value dropped 99% instantly. Desperate attempts to resell recovered almost nothing of the original value. The sophistication of modern synthetic diamonds had completely defeated traditional visual detection methods. The stupidity of not regularly testing valuable inventory with modern equipment destroyed the collection value. 35. A movie producer lost $300 million financing films that bombed catastrophically at the box office. Every single movie ignored market research and audience taste testing. Personal conviction about artistic vision completely overrode any commercial sense. Marketing couldn't save fundamentally flawed films that audiences hated. Distribution deals were terrible because everyone knew the films would fail. The string of failures made future financing completely impossible. The stupidity of making movies nobody wanted to see destroyed the fortune. 36. A casino developer lost $450 million building in a market completely saturated with competing casinos. Market analysis clearly and obviously showed insufficient gambling demand for another casino. Construction costs spiraled out of control, while completion was delayed repeatedly. The casino opened deeply in debt to a market with dramatic oversupply. Operating losses mounted while competitors aggressively cut prices. Bankruptcy came within 2 years with massive personal guarantees triggered. The stupidity of ignoring obvious market saturation destroyed the investment. 37. A software entrepreneur lost $200 million when his company's product became instantly obsolete from a technology paradigm shift. The company had one product line that new technology made completely irrelevant overnight. Stubborn refusal to adapt or pivot left the company selling obsolete software. Revenue collapsed as customers switched to new platforms. The company value evaporated within months. His concentrated stock holdings became completely worthless. The stupidity of clinging to dying technology destroyed the fortune. 38. A currency trader lost $1.1 billion in a flash crash when trading algorithms went completely haywire. High-frequency trading positions were destroyed in seconds. Stop-loss orders didn't execute because the market moved faster than the systems could process. Margin calls arrived before he even understood what had happened. The algorithmic trading he didn't fully understand had destroyed everything. Personal liability for trading losses exceeded his entire net worth. Bankruptcy protection proved insufficient against the trading debts. The stupidity of using algorithms he didn't understand cost him everything. 39. A private equity investor lost $380 million in a leveraged buyout that immediately went bankrupt. The acquisition was funded entirely with debt based on wildly optimistic projections. Operating reality was dramatically worse than due diligence had suggested. Debt payments consumed all cash flow from day one. The company declared bankruptcy within 6 months of the acquisition. The equity investment was completely wiped out. Personal guarantees on debt created massive additional liability. The stupidity of over-leveraging a fundamentally weak business destroyed the investment. 40. A day trader lost $75 million in one trading session through accidental trades caused by keyboard malfunction. A malfunctioning keyboard caused massive unintended trades to execute rapidly. The error wasn't noticed until millions in losses had accumulated. Brokers refused to cancel the clearly accidental trades as the system error was on his end. The losses exceeded his account value, triggering personal liability beyond the account. Years of successful trading profits were destroyed in minutes by pure accident. The stupidity of trading without safeguards against technical error cost him everything. 41. A vitamin company owner lost $160 million when products were revealed to contain none of the advertised ingredients. Independent testing showed pills were mostly rice powder filler with no active ingredients whatsoever. Class action lawsuits and massive regulatory fines destroyed the company. Criminal fraud charges resulted in complete asset seizure. The scandal destroyed the brand overnight. Retail partners demanded full refunds on all inventory. The stupidity of deliberately selling fake products destroyed the business and created criminal liability. 42. A nightclub owner lost $90 million through systematic employee theft that continued undetected for years. Managers were skimming cash and giving away free bottles systematically. The owner's complete lack of oversight enabled theft to grow enormous. When finally discovered, the stolen amount exceeded the business value. The employees had hidden the theft through completely false records. Criminal prosecution recovered almost nothing. The stupidity of not monitoring his own business allowed theft to destroy it completely. 43. A biotech founder lost $520 million when clinical trials proved his company's core science was completely wrong. The drug mechanism didn't work as theorized despite years of expensive research. Investors realized the entire scientific premise was flawed from the very beginning. The stock collapsed as the science failure became publicly clear. His reputation prevented any future fundraising in the biotech industry. The wealth built on promising but fundamentally wrong science evaporated. The stupidity of pursuing flawed science despite multiple warning signs destroyed the company. 44. A shipping magnate lost $800 million when fuel prices spiked and his completely unhedged fleet became catastrophically unprofitable. Fuel costs exceeded revenue on every single voyage, with prices doubling. Competitors who had properly hedged fuel costs survived while he went bankrupt. The ships were sold at massive losses during the crisis. Personal guarantees on loans made him liable far beyond the business value. The refusal to hedge because he knew prices would fall destroyed everything. The stupidity of not hedging catastrophic risk cost him his entire fortune. 45. A penny stock promoter lost $30 million when the SEC shut down his pump and dump scheme and froze all his assets. The illegal scheme involved promoting worthless stocks through false information while secretly selling his own shares. The regulatory investigation exposed the systematic fraud and market manipulation. Criminal charges resulted in complete asset forfeiture before trial. Prison time meant complete inability to manage any remaining money or assets. The legal judgments created permanent debt beyond the frozen assets. Civil suits from defrauded investors piled on millions in additional liability. The entire fortune was seized and he left prison years later owing millions more than he had before. The stupidity of thinking he could permanently profit from securities fraud destroyed everything and resulted in years of imprisonment, proving that some ways of losing fortunes are straightforward criminal activity, while others are just criminally stupid decisions. But all of them demonstrate the same fundamental truth. Making money requires intelligence and effort, keeping money requires wisdom and discipline, and losing everything can happen faster than you ever imagined when you make that one catastrophically stupid decision that you can never, ever take back. Subscribe if you found these financial disasters as shocking as we did. And remember that staying rich is often harder than getting rich, and that one moment of supreme stupidity can cost you absolutely everything you've worked your entire life to build.